Let's get right to it. This isn't just another trade deal you'll see in the headlines and forget about tomorrow. No, what we're talking about is a geopolitical earthquake. It's a high-stakes play on the global chessboard that could completely redefine who makes what, challenge China's long-held dominance, and just maybe catapult a new nation into the role of the world's next great factory. We're going to break down exactly what this means, why it's all happening right now, and what could possibly come next.
You know, it all started with this one phrase that just exploded online: the dad of all deals. It's a nickname that came from an Indian industrialist. And honestly, it perfectly captures the sheer size and ambition of what's unfolding between the US and India. It's bold, it's confident, and it signals that something big is shifting in the world.
So that's the real question we have to unpack here. Are we just looking at some numbers changing on a spreadsheet, some tariff adjustments? Or are we actually witnessing the first tremors of a new economic era, one that's deliberately designed to redraw the entire map of global manufacturing and power? The stakes really couldn't be any higher.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. What exactly is this deal? Well, on the surface, it looks like an agreement to end a pretty nasty trade dispute. But when you look just a little bit deeper, you see it's really the foundation for a whole new strategic economic alliance, with massive, massive implications.
Now, the timeline here is fascinating because it shows you just how fast this whole thing went from crisis to resolution. So January 2025, Trump kicks off his second term. By August, things have gone south, and bam, he hits India with these crippling 50% tariffs. But then, in this really stunning turnaround, just 6 months later, in February 2026, they announced this landmark deal. This was not some slow, drawn-out negotiation. This was a high-pressure, high-speed diplomatic sprint.
And here's the headline moment. On February 2nd, 2026, the two leaders revealed that they'd reached an agreement to dramatically roll back those punitive tariffs. For Prime Minister Modi, this was framed as a huge win for his whole Made in India initiative. It was like a locked door to the world's biggest consumer market just swung wide open.
All right, let's move past the headlines and get into the real meat of this thing, the numbers, because the figures behind this agreement are what really show you its true scope and power. This is where it all gets very, very real.
The scale of this reduction is just staggering. I mean, we're not talking about a minor tweak here. We're talking about a massive plunge from a crippling 50% all the way down to a flat, predictable 18%. If you're an Indian business that was staring into the abyss, this is way more than a lifeline. It's a green light to hit the accelerator.
And this table really shows us who the biggest winners are. Just look at sectors like gems and jewelry. That's an $8.5 billion export industry. Or apparel and autos. They were all facing that 50% wall. Now all of a sudden, they're competitive again. And this isn't just about saving jobs, it's about creating a potential flood of new orders and attracting a ton of new investment. It's also worth noting that pharmaceuticals, which is a massive export, was already exempt, so that remains a really steady pillar. And this is the grand prize, $500 billion. That's the target for trade between the US and India by 2030. It's a goal from Prime Minister Modi's Mission 500 plan. And let's be clear, that is an incredibly ambitious number. It's more than doubling the current trade volume. This deal is designed to be the rocket fuel to get them there. Okay, so now we get to the real strategy behind all the numbers. This deal is not happening in a vacuum. It is a calculated, strategic power play aimed squarely at rebalancing the entire global manufacturing landscape.
Now, if you're not familiar with it, the China Plus One strategy is actually pretty simple. For decades, global companies basically put all their eggs in the China basket. But with rising costs, geopolitical tensions, and all the supply chain chaos we've seen, that started to look really, really risky. China Plus One just means finding a second, reliable manufacturing hub. And India is basically raising its hand and yelling, "We'll be your plus one!"
And this chart, well, it tells the whole story. With a U.S. tariff rate of just 18%, India now has a real price advantage over its regional competitors, who are sitting at 20%. But the real target here is obvious: China, stuck with a massive 47.5% tariff. This deal effectively builds a giant tariff wall around China while paving a superhighway for goods made in India.
And this quote from the U.S. Vice President just nails the American perspective on all of this. This isn't just about economics, it's pure geopolitics. It's about strengthening alliances with democratic partners to counter strategic rivals. It is a crystal-clear signal that Washington sees New Delhi as a core pillar of its future strategy.
But here's the thing. This deal, as huge as it is not an isolated event. It's actually the capstone of a much broader and very deliberate global strategy that India has been pursuing.
Let's zoom out for a second and look at that bigger picture. See, India's been methodically going after what some have been calling the famous five, a series of high-impact trade deals with key partners. Before the dad of all deals with the US, there was the so-called mother of all deals with the EU, plus agreements with the UK, Oman, and New Zealand. Each one of these is a carefully placed piece of a much larger puzzle.
And the strategy behind this is really key. India famously walked away from that massive Asian trade bloc called RCEP, mostly because they feared it would be dominated by China. So instead, they've chosen this path of independent, targeted agreements. It lets India get the benefits of trade without having to compromise on its own sensitive domestic sectors. You could say it's a strategy of precision over just pure scale.
So the deal sounds absolutely monumental, but you know how it is, an announcement is one thing, the reality is always buried in the fine print. And right now, a lot of that fine print is still a mystery. So we have to ask, what is it that we don't know? While the official line from India's chief economic advisor is one of total confidence, he's on the record saying this deal removes all uncertainty for global capital. That is a very bold statement, and it's clearly designed to signal stability and opportunity to the entire global market. But here is the elephant in the room. The White House has suggested that this whole deal is conditional. Conditional on what, you ask? On India halting its pretty significant purchases of Russian crude oil. That is a massive geopolitical string attached, and so far we have heard crickets. No official confirmation from the Indian side.
And this leads to a whole host of really important unanswered questions. Yeah, the Russian oil issue is number one, for sure. But we also don't have a firm timeline. We don't have the final list of exactly which products are covered. We don't really know if that $500 billion target is truly achievable. And maybe most importantly, where's the final signed text of the deal? Nobody's seen it. The official word we're getting from both sides is that the deal is still being papered, which is basically just government speak for the lawyers are still hammering out the details. They have made it clear that India hasn't given any ground on protecting sensitive areas like dairy and poultry, but the full scope of the agreement, that's still under wraps.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely critical question. Is this the moment? Is this the moment we'll all look back on and say, that's when India decisively stepped up to become the heir to the world's factory floor? This deal lays all the groundwork, but its success is going to depend on the answers to all those lingering questions, and ultimately, on India's ability to actually execute on this historic opportunity. The game is on.